The sitting is resumed.
Government notice, we committed, sir.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Bill 2022.
First readings of bills, we committed.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Bill 2022.
The question of the aforementioned bill be read here first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Government business, we committed, sir. Order number 6, in the name of the Honourable Senior Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, to move the second reading of the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Bill 2022.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I was to, let me copy here. If I was to label this presentation with a theme, that theme would go back to what we always heard growing up. A stitch in time saves 9. And that encapsulates so much of what this matter before us is all about. And this matter, Mr. Speaker, is essentially into 2 parts. The first part being the opportunity to pay entities that have given the response to the catastrophe that was visited on our shores, Hurricane Elsa, and the freak storm, by the way, because it does both. And then the second part of it is to change the purpose of the Catastrophe Fund to allow us not only to respond after an event, but also to appreciate that there are certain measures you can take in advance of a catastrophe. Now, when this legislation first came, it was always designed after the catastrophe. But you and I and everybody in Barbados knows that when we expect a catastrophe, when we expect high winds, there are certain things you do in advance so that if you have a problem, it would mitigate those. And that is what we're seeking to do in this bill. So 2 aspects to it. The first aspect is to pay agencies like National Housing Corporation, Urban Development Commission, Rural Development Commission for the work that they would have done to expend with the catastrophe that we had in the freak storm and Hurricane Elsa. In the past, the Catastrophe Fund only was set up to pay businesses and individuals, but never as en bloc as this is seeking to do. And the second and more important part, to my mind, is to be able to give people an opportunity to prepare in advance of a catastrophe. And I'll give you an example. You know, Mr. Speaker, whenever now you're invited to speak at a conference internationally, the buzzwords are resilience, 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 and resilience. And why is that? Why is it that everywhere is talking resilience? We only have to look at the CNN today at what has happened in Florida with Hurricane Ian. It is a major, major disaster costing billions and billions of dollars. You only have to look, Mr. Speaker, at what happened in Pakistan. You could imagine an event that floods 1/3 of a nation, 1/3 of a whole country, the size of Pakistan. That's like if, Mr. Speaker, 3 parishes in Barbados were completely flooded out and completely underwater. St. Michael, your great constituency, Christchurch, St. James, and part of St. Philip. Could you imagine 3.5 of those being completely flooded and water being on those for days? That is what the people of Pakistan had to endure and are enduring. Climate change is real. I could remember very clearly, Mr. Speaker, a satellite photograph, and it had 4 hurricane systems in the Atlantic at the same time. Never before heard of in this region. So this is why wherever we go, be it IDB, be it CARIF, be it housing programs, road infrastructure, hotel development, even the economics of it, wherever we go, the buzzword is preparing and being a resilient nation, designing for resilience. And that is what we are here about today. Because at the end of the day, we have to understand, we have to re-engineer, we have to rethink, and we have to make sure that going forward, everything we design is designed with that resilience in nature and understanding. Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Elsa was a tremendous burden on this country. Tremendous burden. I have the updated numbers. There were 1,746 houses were impacted in some way that reached out to get assistance. Now that is not all that got damaged, because there are many private people that did not reach out to government and had to fix their houses on their own. Many of them that the insurance companies looked at them and said, oh, the amount of damage that you have doesn't come to your deductible, so you have to do it totally on your own. Me included. Because a tree fell down and damaged 2 of my houses, and I had to fix them on my own. And that happened to many, many people across Barbados who are insured, but the damage did not get to the level of the deductible. So even although government did 1,746 houses, my estimation is many, many more houses got damaged, but people fixed them on their own. Of those 1,746 houses, between the Urban Development Commission, the Rural Development Commission, and National Housing Corporation, they have been able to do 554 and started 537. So they have 73% of those houses have actually either started or been completed. The greatest success, though, what I found, and my colleague minister will also tell you, was the opportunity for people to get materials provided to them. And that was a great opportunity, because people are able to help themselves. They just needed a little help with the materials. And the National Housing Corporation was able to provide 213 householders, and they made the arrangements to do the repairs themselves. And you know what? To me, that was a good program, and it was a better program, and I'll explain to you why. If your roof is damaged, Mr. Speaker, and you can get your roof on quickly, because you get the materials from National Housing, they assessed it, and you get your roof on quickly, you are in a better position than the person whose roof is damaged and they wait for somebody to come and do the repairs because it takes longer. And you know what? As more rains come, the rains then get into your floor, and your floor gets damaged. So you now not only have a damaged roof, but you now have a damaged floor. And it is important that when you have damage to your structure of the house, that you get it fixed as quickly as possible, because if you don't, the knock-on effect will be further damage to other parts of the house. And that is why the provision of materials was the best, because it got repairs done in a quick and speedy manner and didn't allow further damage to other parts of the house. Because what we found in this response, Mr. Speaker, is that the houses that we got done quickly had less repairs to do than the houses that took longer. Because the longer the floor, especially, and the walls were exposed to the environment, the more repairs were required. And this is an important part of this legislation as well. Because in the beginning, because remember, we started with the freak storm. People forget the freak storm, that we had to spend about $3 million in. And then we came to this. Now, in the beginning, all of the repairs were done strictly from central government. All of it was done strictly from central government. And none of the repairs, none of the money was accessed from the Catastrophe Fund. In fact, we have estimated that the cost to complete this whole matter, to fix all of the houses and all of the expenses, would in fact be more than what is in the Catastrophe Fund anyway. We're looking at the total to be, I think it's 93, in the order of $93 million. The total in the order of $108 million is what was visited on Barbados with that hurricane. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, if we had a Category 2? Can you imagine if we had a Category 3? If a Category 1 hurricane, for a short period of time, caused $108 million in damage. We, as a nation, have to understand how important design and resilience is for us. We have to appreciate that we are in a hurricane belt. We have to appreciate that hurricanes are going to be coming more frequently and more ferociously. And we have to design for that. And it doesn't only mean designing houses. It means designing roads. It means designing hotels. It means designing buildings with the understanding that more and more of these disasters will likely be coming our way. And I'll give you an example to how you can design resilience in a road. Normally, when we do a drain, a culvert for a road, which is what takes the water away from the road, it is of a certain size based on the volume of water you expect. And it is a volume rate to volume ratio for the size of the culvert. These days, with building resilience, what we have found is that culverts have to be wider and deeper to be able to carry a greater volume of water in the period of time it's expected to carry it. That is one way of doing resilience for roads. The camber of the road, camber is the curve of the road. A lot of people don't appreciate, they think a road is flat. Roads are not designed to be flat. They're designed to carry the water away from the middle to the sides. What we found is to be able to take that water away faster, we had to change the camber of the road, which is the hump, the middle part is higher than the sides, so that water is diverted from the front, from the middle, into the sides, on into the drain. The thickness of the asphalt, the type of material used, not limestone, but changed into granite, so that we don't get water seeping through the cracks and forming holes and destroying the road just because we get a little rain. Because you're going to get more and more rain, and you have to design for that. From a hotel point of view, we encourage hoteliers not to have any hotel rooms on the ground floor, but raise it up so that you reduce the risk of storm surge, so that you reduce the risk of flooding in habitable areas, so that the design is to Category 4 and not to Category 2, so that the windows are designed better to be able to take the higher force winds. And of course, when we come to houses, the gradient of the roof, a higher gradient. A higher gradient, my colleague is saying pitch, I think gradient. We understand pitch and gradient, both the same. And a design, be it rather it is hip or gable, but designed so that it can withstand the winds. But we go further, and this is the important part of this, is to give householders an opportunity to be able to access the catastrophe fund, not after the catastrophe, but in advance. Those below the poverty line, we are given an opportunity for them to retrofit hurricane straps and collar ties. The hurricane strap will join the rafters of the roof to the walls of the house. In the past, the legislation did not allow this because the legislation said you could only benefit from the catastrophe fund if you were the victim of a catastrophe. We are saying, let's do that stitch in time and save 9. Give us the opportunity once this legislation is passed so that we can use the funds from the catastrophe fund not to respond only after reactive, but let us be proactive. Let us give people who are below the poverty line a chance to retrofit by putting hurricane straps and collar ties to make their roofs more resilient. And that is part of what this legislation is about. Because we have to appreciate that it is not only about being reactive. It's not only about reacting after an event, that there are many, many things you can do in advance of the event and reduce the problems that happen after. That stitch in time. That stitch that is absolutely essential. That stitch that will save us as a country, save us as a nation. And not only about saving money, impacting on people's lives. Impacting on people's lives. Mr. Speaker, I'm sad to say, but there's still people who are in accommodation because there are difficulties getting their house repaired. Difficulties in land issues. The landlord say, I want you off this land ever since. And now that the highway come and blow down the house, you can't build back here. We have seen it reported in the press left all the time. And that's an issue that we have, and we're having to find new accommodation for those people. It's a problem for us, but we deal with it. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? You know, I hear all the time people saying this should have been done ever since, and so on, 70% done. You know, Puerto Rico of the great United States, Mr. Speaker, had a hurricane called Maria a few years ago. You know, they're still responding to Hurricane Maria. 4 years, almost 5 years on. Still responding to Hurricane Maria. The great United States of America. And Barbados, a developing nation, has managed to get 73% through the good work of the member for St. George South. Well, he's saying, and myself, I only started it, but he's continued the good work. And the people from the National Housing Corporation, the Urban Development Commission, and the Rural Development Commission, 73% started or completed in a year. I think that they've done well with minimal resources. And the issue obviously has been finance. In the early response, it was all done through central government. But it comes a time that central government reaches its limit. And there are other pressures on the central government's purse. And this is now, once this legislation is passed, it gives us an opportunity to access the catastrophe fund. But that's what it's there for. The catastrophe fund is there to support the government and support the people of Barbados when there is a catastrophe. Well, Mr. Speaker, if 1,700 houses being damaged, of which 500 and something, almost 600 being destroyed, is not a catastrophe in this country, then what is? Other than a pandemic, that is also a catastrophe. So, this legislation will give us an opportunity. And the other part that the legislation, the change in the legislation will do, the amendment will do, is rather than having to pay individuals, because how the catastrophe fund was designed in the past, each individual had to apply, they had to give all their receipts, they had to give all in advance and go through a whole form process. But because we responded by agencies, this will give an opportunity for the catastrophe fund to pay back to the agencies directly rather than taking the period of time that it would doing 1,700 houses. It would be a logistics issue for them to do that number of houses. So those are essentially the two parts of the bill. I want to go back to one aspect of it, and it has to do with the Barbados Light and Power. I know it's quite topical because the Barbados Light and Power is going through a rate hearing now, and I won't get into the rate hearing aspect to it. But prior to the changeover, when the company took over the Light and Power, I am aware that there was a move to change the light poles in this country. Now, the Light and Power owns the light poles, and this is an important point because it is part of the resilience of the nation. After Maria, the light poles that were destroyed at 10 feet up and above. They were all wooden light poles. Wooden light poles run the risk of snapping due to the tension of the wires when they get waterlogged and the wood itself. A proposal was put before the Barbados Light and Power to make a lighter but more efficient light pole made of a hollow concrete. This would not mean changing all the light poles. It would build resilience in because a concrete light pole of the same weight or less than the wood can resist what we call torsion and tension. Now, torsion and tension is the ability to flex and bend of the pole and run the risk of fracture. And these light poles would have not had to be placed all over. You do that as in terms of what we call redundancy. So as one light pole has to be replaced, you replace it rather than with a wooden light pole, you replace it with a concrete light pole. They do 5,000 light poles a year, I'm told. So that means there are 80,000 light poles in Barbados. So in about 14 to 15 years, they've been able to replace all of the light poles across this nation with a better, more resilient light pole, making the country more resilient to be able to provide electricity after a catastrophic event. You know, Mr. Speaker, they shelved that when the company was changed. They shelved it. They shelved it because they said, oh, where we come from, they got a lot of wood. And in any event, if they have a catastrophe, they ain't got nobody to sell electricity to, so they're then in a rush to put back in the electricity service. Why disagree with that? And I think that a company focused on the bottom line and not understanding their social responsibility, I have a problem with. Because companies in this country, and companies that are essentially monopolies, whose responsibility it is to provide an electricity service to the houses and the businesses of this country, should do everything in their power to make sure that their infrastructure is protected. Now, if there's an opportunity out there for a better, improved light pole that they could have put in over a period of time to make the light poles and by extension the electrical infrastructure better in this country, they should have done it and not focus on the bottom line. And we have to understand, we all have to live in this place together. And if it wasn't for the hardworking people of this country, there'd be no Emera and Light and Power because there's nobody to buy their service. And if they make it so hard for us to buy their service, then people will look for other alternatives. So, Mr. Speaker, this is very, very important for those that have been impacted by this catastrophe, so that we can get all the houses that have not been started and finished. This is very, very important for our nation, so that the people that have had this stress put on them can be put right and made whole again. You know, today, there's a saying, today for me, tomorrow for you. This time you were not impacted, but it doesn't mean next time you might not be. And we may have to come back and access the catastrophe fund again. And the whole concept of building for resilience. I remember when I was Minister of Transport, we used to have to go and clear the sand in St. Peter by the salt pond, because the concept of preparing in advance is important. We would have a meeting with the Prime Minister and all the various ministries in advance, getting all the gullies cleared, getting all the trash out of the gully. Sailor Gully is one that comes to mind, because that was the biggest one to do. I remember when the Constitution River had to be done, coming up to the Globe, because if that is blocked, then you have flooding going back to your area, Mr. Speaker, all the way back up the hill. All of this is about preparation. So if we understand preparation when we expect high winds and when we expect floods, we have to understand preparation for the average householder as well. And let me be clear, all of these people who have gotten back houses, they have to sign off so that for 10 years it remains the property of the government, and then only after that, then it goes out to them. So it's not a free ride. It is understanding that the government of Barbados is coming to assist you, because this is a caring government. This is a government that is prepared to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and make sure that you are made whole again. And that's what this is about. So once we get this legislation passed, we get the access to the Catastrophe Fund, we can expedite and get these repairs and replacements done as quickly as possible. That's part one, with the Urban Development Commission, the Rural Development Commission, and the National Housing Corporation. And part two, which is to me a more important part, because this is only 1,700 houses. Imagine if we were able to give an opportunity to 4,000 houses to be able to retrofit them with hurricane straps and collar ties. It's not a big amount of money, $100, $200 to those below the poverty line. But that 100 or 200 spent then may save 50,000, 60,000 in a new house, or 25,000 in repairs. Well, it's a no-brainer. But the Catastrophe Fund never allowed it. And this is why it's so important to be forward-thinking. You know, I always say, Mr. Speaker, if you continue to think inside the box, be prepared to live in the box. But that's not how this government operates. We think outside the box because the box cannot contain us. We have to see further than that. And that's why the people of Barbados have shown the confidence in us as a party and as a nation to take on their problems and make solutions for them and put those solutions into practice. So I'm very, very happy with what the member for St. George South has been able to do. He has run with that program. They've done an excellent job, and they continue to do an excellent job, and they're going to complete this project. They're going to complete it, especially once they're able to access these funds. And the other project, of course, will be the Strap It project to get, and as I understand, 60 people as a pilot project have already benefited from hurricane straps and collar ties being placed to strengthen their house. Will it mean that your house don't get damaged? No. And I want to be clear, hurricane straps and collar ties don't mean that your house will not get any damage. Will the damage be reduced because you get a chance to keep your roof on? Yes. You know, it's because sometimes you see people with blocks on top of their roof. I don't know if you've seen it. But whether you like it or not, that little added weight is add a little something to keep the roof down. And people recognize this. I remember going through at the BDF, and I saw them, they actually had hostile wire on top some containers, and then stake them into the ground to be able to keep buildings in place when the high winds come. Our main problem in this country has not been flooding. Flooding is an issue, but it generally dissipates. All of this damage is predominantly wind damage to roofs and structures. And that is what we have to protect against. And that is why we have to make our houses more resilient, make our buildings more resilient, make our roads more resilient, make our infrastructure, especially light and power, more resilient. This is why when we did Highway 1, we put all of the conduits in place so they can go underground with all their cables. So you don't have to dig back up the road when you're going to do that. That was done. That's why the plan for Highway 7 is to do the same. Put all the conduits underground so that when they're ready to do the cables, they go underground rather than being overhead. And it will happen one day. In the same way that we will have electricity even come into your house underground rather than being connected to the house, so that you have that resilience, so that when a tree falls down, it isn't going to fall and pull down all the wires because it's underground. We have to think outside the box. We have to prepare ourselves for any eventuality because we recognize that this is a changing world. This is a changing world that is caused by climate change, which we as a nation are at the forefront of. You know, I heard the president of Pakistan saying that they contribute an infinitesimal amount to global warming, but they're at the forefront by virtue of a third of their country being flooded. Well, if they contribute infinitesimal, ours is almost insignificant for the infinitesimal. But we too are at the forefront because we are in Hurricane Alley. We're the first landfall after Africa, and we get the first of the hurricanes. And that is why we have to appreciate and understand that we must build with that knowledge in mind and build in resilience and have the catastrophe. And you know, when I think back, the wisdom of our forefathers and those that went before us to put this catastrophe fund in place was a fantastic idea. Where would we be now if we did not have this fund in place? Where would we be now? So I thank them, and I thank the people of Barbados for understanding that this is absolutely essential and a must for us to be able to get our brothers and sisters back to where they were. Let us work together to make them whole again. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable, we need to move that the bill be read a second time.
I beg to move this bill read a second time.
Honourable for Christchurch, please.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes you get those strange things, sir, that cut across many ministries. And when the Catastrophe Fund was first conceived, it was seen pretty much as a finance measure, something that fell under the purview of the Minister of Finance. It was invested by the NIS, and it fell under the Ministry of Finance. And in so drafting and constructing the legislation strictly pretty much as a financial measure and a financial solution, certain things were not thought about. And the thing about legislation, sir, being somebody who practices criminal law, is quite often you only see the effects of the legislation and the holes in the legislation, the shortcomings in the legislation, when the legislation is allowed to play out. So you may draft what you think is a perfect piece of legislation, but as time allows that legislation to be interpreted, or time allows for that legislation to be put into practice, you then sometimes see where certain things were not considered, or times have moved on that certain things now warrant consideration. This is one such case, sir. Now, my friend, sir, from Christchurch West has taken us through the construction and practical and technical aspects of it. I mean, he used words like gradient, sir, when simple people like you and me would use words like pitch. But he took us through the technical aspects of it and explained why the amendments were necessary. I do realize, sir, that quite often people distrust amendments to legislation. When amendments come in short order, people sometimes question them. When it's amendments to a fund or access to the funds in a fund, then it raises certain questions. And I wish to, by explaining what the actual amendments are and where the differences lie, dispel some of those questions before they even arise. So, sir, The first thing that was changed, sir, was Section 4, repealing Section 4 of the substantive piece of legislation. And I'm going to read what subsection 4 in its original form was, sir. It says that the purpose of this fund is to provide financial aid to eligible persons and qualifying businesses in need of such aid as a result of a catastrophe. So that starts by contemplating that the catastrophe has happened and we're now seeking to patch up. And it then explains, sir, who those persons were who were eligible to draw, and that occurred in the first schedule. And in the first schedule, sir, the persons eligible to draw on the fund or to make an application were persons who own property that was less than $150,000 in value, and individuals who their yearly income was less than $25,000. So those pretty much below or in the realm of the poverty line, sir. And it also then looked at businesses, the 2020 amendment looked at businesses, sir, that might suffer in a pandemic or something else like that. So the new amendment to Section 4 says that the purpose of the fund is to provide financial aid to eligible persons and qualifying businesses in need of such aid. So it's not time-bound, in need of such aid. And to facilitate measures by the state to mitigate or remedy the adverse effects of a catastrophe. Mitigation, sir, contemplates actions before the catastrophe, and it also can encompass actions afterwards, and that deals with remedying as well. Now, one of the fundamental changes to 4, so was the facilitation of measures by the state to mitigate these things. What we had, sir, following ELSA was an ambitious plan by the government to try to fix as many houses as it could for persons who could not afford to fix their houses. I am very familiar with it, sir, because I was deeply involved in it by virtue of disaster emergency management falling under my portfolio. And I spent, in the early days, sir, some very, very long meetings with the Honourable Member for St. George South and also the Member for Christchurch West, as we literally went through all of the reports. You had to send persons out to validate the reports. You had to then try to put them in order. You had to try to decide what was critical for now, what was a complete rebuild, what was a remediation. And it got very difficult. But the agencies of the Crown that were contemplated under the 2020 legislation were the UDC and the RDC. But what then happened, sir, as I said, remember, it started by saying that it was a financial contemplation in drafting the initial legislation. So UDC and RDC, sir, fell under the same ministry as the Ministry of Finance, which was the Prime Minister's substantive ministry. What ended up happening, sir, is that the Honourable Member for St. George South, by virtue of National Housing Corporation, were undertaking the vast majority of the renovations and rebuilds. But there's no provision in the Act as it now stands for the National Housing Corporation to recoup its funds from the catastrophe legislation, from the catastrophe fund. Now, sir, the other thing, the money was paid as a grant to the individual. So the person made a claim on the fund and it was paid as a grant. Now, sir, this takes us to another part of the amendment. Sir, it says, the amendment to the first schedule, where with the approval of the Physical Catastrophes Committee, a house is provided by an agency to a person who is entitled to a grant under this paragraph, and repairs are effected by an agency to a house owned by a person who is entitled to a grant under the paragraph, that the committee shall, instead of paying the grant to the person so entitled, pay the amount of the grant to the agency. Now, sir, the previous wording for the first schedule, as I said, sir, there's no mischief in this. This is purely to address practical considerations and get people's houses fixed. Sir, in section 1.5 under the first schedule, that's the old legislation that we're now repealing that we're now amending, sir. It said, where with the approval of the Physical Catastrophes Committee, a house has been provided by an agency to a person who is entitled to a grant under this paragraph, or repairs have been effected by an agency to a house owned by the person who's entitled to a grant under the paragraph, there's a critical part here, sir. The committee shall, instead of paying the grant to the person entitled, pay the amount of the grant to the agency if the work was carried out to the satisfaction of the committee. Now, the problem with that, sir, that contemplates the completion of all of the works before access can then be had to the fund. So a person applying for the grant in this situation had to find themselves in a position to get the work done, finish, then present their receipts and ask for the money back. And that also applied in relation to the UDC and RDC. So this current amendment, sir, allows UDC, RDC, and the National Housing Corporation, and the ambit was widened, there's a catch-all phrase in there, sir, widened to deal with any other agencies of the government that will be responsible for provision of social services, whatnot. So, because we had the issue with having to substitute NHC, we widened that, sir, to capture any other agencies or authorities of government that might subsequently be charged with providing things to deal with catastrophes. So we don't have to come back if there's something else, if they create another ministry or another statutory corporation that deals with that. So we've covered that there now. But it allows those agencies now, and it gives the committee the flexibility to contemplate an application by the agency on behalf of the person, because the agencies can actually apply by virtue of the first amendment that I read. So the agencies can apply, or the person can apply and say that the agency is working for them. But the important thing is that you can now access money to mobilize. The committee can do it in stage payments. The committee can decide that, we want to inspect when the foundation is done. We want to, I don't know, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West is more familiar with the stages of the house building. I think it's foundation, then ring beam, then roof, and then windows or something, plastering or whatnot. So the committee can actually set the terms and conditions that it wants or that make practical sense in a construction world. Sir, if any of the persons who are affected by ELSA had to complete their repairs on their own and then seek to draw on the fund, this fund would never get touched. It wouldn't get touched. The fact that this fund exists is to service those persons who are not in a position to repair their house. So the clause in there that required where an agency does it, that had to, the completed works had to meet the approval of the committee, sir, kind of negated the intention. I can see where they wanted to do it. You don't want a bogus contractor fixing and carrying away money or overbilling or something like that, sir. But where you're talking about agencies of government, if you can't trust the National Housing Corporation to manage its own affairs, then it needs to start working. If you can't trust the UDC and RDC to put things in place to oversee construction, then we make a nonsense of everything else we're doing, then they shouldn't exist. So these amendments, sir, are simply to deal with the practical realities of what we've encountered as a result of dealing with Hurricane Elsa. Now, sir, when we started to try to prioritize the works and we started to allocate the contractors, the government had to try to find the money from somewhere. Right? The fund was not accessible or available because we needed to amend the legislation. The government had to try to find the money from somewhere. So we ended up with a situation, sir, where, quite frankly, we were overwhelmed by the amount of construction that had to take place. So in addition to having shortages of materials, you had a situation where you're pulling from a very small spot because we're going through difficult economic times. You're starting houses, everybody constructing at the same time, everybody's calling for money at the same time, and you ended up in a situation, sir, where some of the construction and repairs had to pause. So you might just see the houses chipping up initially, but then the money dried up. So you have a situation, sir, where you have half-finished houses, but we don't have the money to finish them. And we couldn't draw from the money to finish them because the clause as it stood just now required the completed house done by the agency to the satisfaction of the committee. So this now, I think, more captures what was contemplated at that time and what makes practical sense. It doesn't make sense otherwise. Not a cent from the catastrophe fund was put or applied to what was probably the single biggest catastrophe that we had in living history. Because as drafted, it didn't permit it. But that is something, sir, that I can understand why it did not go in initially, but it's one of those things that it becomes obvious after you have to deal with the subject matter of the act, and then you butt the stumbling blocks because of how the act was drafted. So, the act also, the amendment also, sir, widens the discretion and ambit of both the committees, the Physical Catastrophe Committee and the Economic Catastrophe Committee, sir, in relation to businesses who can stand to benefit. So, as it stood before, the businesses could benefit for economic disruption. So if you had a business, sir, that I think the contemplation at the time was, because of the pandemic, put in something to cover businesses who suffered economic hardship as a result of the pandemic. But as drafted now, sir, this also factors that we have to look out for very small businesses whose annual turnover is less than $500,000. So those are the home businesses, sir. Those are the single person businesses. Those cover the entrepreneurs. Where, quite frankly, if we don't put you in a position to secure your business and not just recover economically afterwards, but to secure your business even by the same hurricane straps, then when your business blows away, when your roof blows off and you can't fix it back, then the 3 or 4 people that were working for you now have no job. And those persons then have to be taken care of by the state through the social services. So as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West indicated, sir, it's a cost-benefit analysis. It is cheaper to take the preparatory security steps now. It is cheaper to buy hurricane straps and apply those to a roof than it is to try to put back on that roof after the roof has gone missing because of some high winds. And we need to also be realistic, sir. Things are not getting better with the climate. Every single year, we up our expectation of what bad is. I do not think that anybody would have contemplated, sir, that a hurricane would have approached Florida from the west, going west to east, passed over the entire of Florida, spent itself down to a tropical storm, went back out into the open water, went back up to hurricane again, and then hit another part of the American coast. We wouldn't have contemplated that last year, but this is our new normal. We would never have contemplated last year that, as the minister said, 1/3 of Pakistan could have washed away. I don't think we as Bajans can contemplate what the size of Pakistan. I don't know these things, sir, but I'm sure that the Honourable Member probably knows the square mileage of Pakistan. No. But I am sure Barbados could fit into Pakistan a couple million times. Imagine, sir, every single island in the Caribbean, everyone at the same time being underwater, being flooded. It's staggering to contemplate, but these are our new realities. So we have to do the little things that we can do. As we drove around, sir, and as we drove around surveying the damage following Hurricane Elsa, and this government, the ministers of this government, sir, were on the ground. I think probably every single minister and MP was on the ground, literally going to people and trying to evaluate for themselves. In some instances, sir, we were able to evaluate the extent of the damage by the photographs and the geotagging that the MPs themselves did on foot in their constituencies. So as we went around, sir, we were able to not just rely on the technocrats, but we were able to see firsthand exactly what happened. It wasn't that the paling just came out, the galvanizers came off, it's that the whole roof went. So at least if you had strapped down the rafters, and even if the galvanized peeled off, then you get back the galvanized and you nail it back on to the existing rafters, and you can have some measure of security. In instances, sir, we were trying to cover whole houses with tarpaulin because there was no rafters to nail galvanized onto. We saw some houses that looked like the roof should have gone, next to houses that looked in better condition than them that were missing their roof. And we realized those houses had a few straps on. Somebody thought to themselves, let me put on some straps. So as I hate to quote the member for Christchurch West, sir. But as he said, it's a no-brainer. It is one of the simplest things and easiest things that we can do. It will not save all. But for everyone that it saves, it is one that we don't have to deal with as an emergency when the next high wind comes. And the next high wind will come. These are the things that we can actually do. So this fund now, sir, is going to be used in a sensible way. It's going to be used in a sensible way. It doesn't make sense running behind the damage after it has passed, sir, when we could expend some of the fund to mitigating beforehand the possible effects so that we preserve the fund in the actual expenditure following the catastrophe. I think that's probably the simplest way that I can explain that, sir. So all of the amendments that were done, and I'm not hiding anything, I'm not glossing over. I took pains to try to do it in the easiest possible language that anybody can understand. So basically, if I was to summarize it, sir, it allows the NHC now to be added as an agency that can do work on the houses. And that is practical because the NHC is probably the single biggest agency or statutory corporation that is managing the repairs following ELSA. So it makes sense to put them on. It removes the requirement for the disbursement of funds as a grant only after, when work is done by the agency, only afterwards, because then the agency ran itself into trouble. The NHC did not have sufficient funds to keep all the contractors mobilized, so everything came to a standstill. By doing this, we now give the NHC the ability to apply to the committee for some mobilization monies to get these things started. So I have every confidence, and I've been assured by the member for St. George South, that once the money is available, the work on all the houses is going to start back in very, very quick order. And he may have suggested to me, sir, that he's going to start with Christchurch East. That's why I'm so passionate here on his behalf. I won't hold him to that, sir, but, you know, time longer than twain. Time longer than twain, sir. And it also provides, sir, that you don't only need the affected person, the person below the poverty line, on the border of the poverty line, to make the application, but the agencies themselves now can approach the fund. So that makes sense. Rather than multiple people going to the fund, it will make sense that the agency that's responsible for the renovations or the work or the repairs or the replacement of the house, that they do their list and then they approach the fund in a block. So that the fund simply has, first of all, the ability of those in the fund to actually go and do the groundwork that the agency does. It probably does not exist. National Housing was set up for that. It has infrastructure for it. It has a build for it, which would not necessarily be an expertise held by the committee. So NHC is the proper person in conjunction with DM to actually verify the damage, do scope of works, engage the contractors, and then present the case to the fund as to what they need. So it's just a tidier arrangement all around. So, sir, I think, sir, that is probably putting it as easy as I can put it. And I completely support the amendments to the Catastrophe Fund. I think that these amendments simply they follow and validate the spirit behind which led to the creation of the fund, and they correct the shortcomings in the legislation that only became apparent after a catastrophe happened and we were able to try to put things in place and realize that this vehicle doesn't actually work for us. So we're now making the vehicle purpose-built for dealing with catastrophes, for acting beforehand to prevent catastrophes, and for trying to let the housing repair following ELSA get back on track. So with those few words, sir, I support this amendment entirely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, to support the bill which would amend the Catastrophe Fund Act 2020. And Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I want to thank the member for Christchurch West and also the member for Christchurch East who spoke before me. And Mr. Speaker, the member for Christchurch East spent many hours dealing with this piece of legislation, and you can listen how he went through every single word and every single line in the amendments presented here this afternoon, that he clearly understands what is needed and what has to be done to bring relief to our citizens, and also to prepare for any catastrophe by utilizing the fund in the most, what I call, efficient and seamless way, without any obstacles, the ability of the three agencies to access the fund. I will speak to some of the challenges presented prior to us accessing this fund. I also want to thank the member for Christchurch West, and I'm not wrapping up. The reason why I'm thanking these members, because this has been a mammoth task to wrestle with 1,746 houses. I want to thank the member for Christchurch West who led this debate this afternoon for these amendments, and also I want to thank him because he was at the forefront when Hurricane Elsa struck this country back in 2021. It was July the 2nd. He was at the helm. And it started, you know, it's ironic because it all started with the DM and the member for Christchurch. He said, you know, every single member in this chamber were out. We had to assess damages, even though the DM was charged with the responsibility under the member for Christchurch. We still saw it fit as true soldiers and servants of the people of this country. We braved the weather and we journey in every nook and cranny across Barbados and every constituency. I can tell you, in St. George South, every single house that has been damaged. I journeyed from Watts Village, from South District to Watts Village to Boarded Hall. Then I move into Easton. I move into Buttles, Brighton, all the areas, Bide Mill, Todd's, Greens, to assess every single damage. And I recall a good friend of mine who's no longer with me, who was deceased in June this year. He traveled with me to every single home. And the Lord rest him peacefully and where he is at this moment. Romaine Mears, a.k.a. Pepper, one of my youngsters who journeyed with me. And Mr. Speaker, why I went there, because when we looked at this task and our Prime Minister said to us, we have to take it on. We must bring relief to the people of this country, must address the aftermath of Hurricane Elsa. And many families suffered. And while I thank, I said in this chamber last week, the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and I'm going to go there. I won't be long. I will wrap up shortly. I'm just finding the statistics. But I think at the end of the year, we have 107 persons now in accommodation. I want to thank the Minister of the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, his Parliamentary Secretary, the former Minister, member for St. Thomas. We house some 107 persons, and there are more. These are only those persons reported by the agencies that have been housed by the Ministry of People's Empowerment. And we've used private as well as communal facilities being paid for by this ministry at the Nazarene Church, Foursquare, the Sons of God Apostolic Church, and Codrington College, while 28 others are being accommodated at facilities being paid for by the Rural Development Commission. And if you understand, there's a cost to all of this, and this is a cost that's been borne by the government, continues to pay for persons in accommodation. And don't let me forget the Ministry of Agriculture. People's Empowerment has expended $930,000 so far. Their projections to the end of the year, if we keep these persons in accommodation, would be $1 million in expenditure would be required to accommodate clients until the end of this year. We need to stop there. This government is really a caring government. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security estimates that between July 2021 and August 2022, it would have expended approximately $673,000 on supplying food to the various communal accommodations. And the ministry currently spends on average $35,000 per month to facilitate the purchase of food required between September and December 2022 to cover the cost of supplying food to the residents of communal accommodation. And I want to thank the minister and his team as well, the member for St. Philip South and his team. We didn't only house them. We are feeding people. We don't talk about things we do, but we have to allow this country to understand what has been done, this Hurricane Elsa and freak storm relief effort. We have to take our hats off to the Prime Minister and the various ministries who during these tough economic times through COVID, we had to battle with COVID, and we were still able to address these challenges: food, housing, accommodation. But I want to thank the member who led off again and the member for Christchurch East, because the amendment speaks to national housing and the agencies accessing the financing through the Housing Credit Fund before the work has been done. That is a critical amendment. The Catastrophe Fund. That's a critical amendment to the Catastrophe Fund, to access the funds before the work has been done. And we don't need receipts to show work has been done. We have trust in agencies, and as the member for Christchurch East mentioned, the National Housing Corporation is set up, as well as rural development and urban development is set up to manage these financial affairs of the agencies as we seek to bring relief to these 1,746 households in this country. But I want to end off by speaking to the effort. And I heard the member for Christchurch West, he quoted the numbers correctly. We provided material to some 213 households. That represents some 12% of the total houses that have to be rebuilt by the three agencies. And if you take out that, as well as homes that will be built by the East-West Partnership, which is about 2%, then repairs and rebuilds across the agencies total 86% of the total repairs and rebuilds across the agencies. And I again want to thank the Rural Development Commission, the staff there. I again want to thank the staff at the Urban Development Commission, and the staff at the National Housing Corporation. The three agencies, we meet weekly to address and discuss the way forward. And also the Ministry of People's Empowerment. We meet weekly to address these issues with scarce resources. I said here last week, and someone asked me what I mean by a war chest, but you would understand what I mean by a war chest, Mr. Speaker. We don't have a war chest. We are now able to access these funds, and 72% of these rebuilds and repairs have started. But the thing about it, we have some 225 still to be mobilized. And I'm happy that this amendment has come at such a time, because with this amendment, we are able to access the Catastrophe Fund so we can mobilize now these 225 families whose houses have not been touched. There's a small percentage, some may say, out of 1,746, that's about 20%, but it's a lot. One household is a lot. You may talk about only 225, but in one household, you may have 7 or 8 persons. You may have 3 persons going to school who don't have internet. You know, who can't do the homework, who have to go to the community center, or who have to beg a friend to let them use their house or their room to get their homework done. But this is fundamental. So I am happy that we're able to access these funds so that we can bring relief to the entire project. Now, let me end off by speaking to National Housing Corporation. Rebuilds and repairs total some 1,400, like I said, and 96. But when you break that down across the 3 agencies, National Housing is responsible for some 75% of the repairs. 75%. Rural and urban, they have 12 and 13 respectively. So you have 757 houses to be repaired. And National Housing has responsibility for repairing 570 of those. That's 75%. All right, so most of the work within the repairs are centered around the rural corridor, you know, suburban rural corridor. But even if it's only 95 within the urban corridor, 95 households are a lot. 2 households are a lot. So we may speak to, you know, National Housing, yes, and I'm happy that National Housing can access these funds now so that the majority of persons who have been damaged by Hurricane Elsa, the repair work can be done quickly. And we intend to finish this project once funds are made available to us through the Catastrophe Fund by the end of the year. Now, the rebuilds, I mentioned repairs totaling some 757. The rebuilds across the 3 agencies are 739. National Housing Corporation is responsible for rebuilding 323 of that 739. That equates to 44%. The rural development, 26%. The urban development, 25%. And east-west, 5%. That gives a total of 100%. The rural development is responsible for 191 rebuilds, while UDC, urban development, 188. So we see the effort by the 3 agencies to have wrestled with 73% of the total number, either starts or work in progress, is remarkable. And I am confident, I speak on behalf of the 3 agencies, as I stand here, we have meetings. I am confident with these amendments before the chamber today, we will be able to bring total relief to all 1,496 that are remaining, having given material to some 213 from National Housing, and the others are work in progress and some still to be touched. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to get into the details of the amendment. I don't want to repeat the member for Christchurch. He did an excellent job in explaining to you this afternoon why these amendments and how we did it with the ability and we were taught to access these funds before the catastrophe and the need to bring some efficiency and seamlessness to the operations as we seek to bring relief to our citizens, the 1,746 households in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very important amendment to the Catastrophe Fund Act 2020. I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for James South.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank my colleagues for the remarks that they've made earlier on this very important amendment, which is going to allow us as a government to be more proactive in how we deal with resilience for our homes against a changing climate. It is indeed a distressing and anxiety-creating environment in which we live, because, sir, what we see all around us every single day in terms of hurricanes, floods, droughts, and so on, and recognizing that the normal patterns are disturbed with no hope of seeing what we call normal return. It is a cause of anxiety for every single citizen of this world. And I am very grateful for the work that has been done by the agencies coming through ELSA and spending the time working with my constituents, looking at the damage, looking at how we can address the problems that they were experiencing. I am really grateful for the hard work done by Barbadians who are part of the UDC, who are part of RDC, NHC, and so on. People work all out. The disaster emergency management team, all of them, national housing, everyone was put to the test in helping us as citizens to be able to recover and to get people back under shelter. And for me in St. James South, one of the hardest hit was Durance. And it made me aware of how fragile our housing stock is, the condition that it is in, that people are not in a position to make the types of repairs that they need to make in order to ensure that they keep that house strong. And therefore, as a government, we've been faced with the position where we recognize that we have an emergency that is on our hands, and this is what would have given rise to the Roof to Reefs program, to look to see what it is we need to do as a country. How can we mobilize the necessary resources that will allow us to be able to take Barbados and make it resilient to a changing climate? One of the things that this speaks to me about, because, sir, I try to look down the road. I like to look ahead. And when it comes to the issue of housing stock, I remember an experience I had when Ivan had devastated Grenada, and I'd had the opportunity to speak with a minister who was returning to that devastation, who had been called urgently by her prime minister and asked, please, I need you to come and do the coordination because our country is devastated. I'm trying to cope with what has happened at my home, what's happened in my constituency. I need somebody to deal with the overall coordination of this problem. And I'll never forget, we met up a little time later, and I remember her words to me. She said, the greatest damage and greatest death did not occur during the hurricane. It occurred months after the hurricane, as people who had lost their homes were faced with the devastating reality that they did not have enough time in front of them to build another home. That when a roof pops and blows, everything inside of that home now is damaged. And everything, including the house and its contents, represents for the average citizen of this region everything that they have worked for. And to be able to replace it is a tremendous challenge. And that is why this proactive approach to be able to make the necessary amendments to the Catastrophe Fund to enable the NHC to do some work to build that resilience is so important. But the main point that I want to make this evening is that it is not only what government is going to do to help build resilience, to protect us against damage. I'll never forget, as someone was speaking about the Pakistan floods and the impact that that will have on agriculture. And again, the things that would have happened in Florida, the impact that that will have, that our food security then becomes threatened within these catastrophes. And therefore, what it says to me is that as a country, Barbadians have to think through a different way of managing their lives. That we cannot go back to a place where we develop that comfort that somehow the systems around us will continue to work in the way they've worked in the past, and that we will always be able to get food, that we will always be able to dodge a bullet with a hurricane. And it says to me that we have to help our citizens to wake up to the fact that there are catastrophes that can sometimes be outside of the reach of a government to solve, but requires an entire country working together to resolve. And this is the call I want to make to Barbadians today. that one of the things we have to do, and the Ministry of Agriculture has been working assiduously on a program, we need to start, for example, to grow our own food, that every household must develop the capacity to be able to put some food on the table in case of a disaster. Just this week, one of my constituents who was able to be a part of the feed program, I stopped and asked him how the flooding had affected him. And he said, Sandra, I lost everything. I lost everything. That flood carried away everything that I'd been working for over the past few weeks. And I got to start from scratch. But I'm strong. I'm resilient. So it means that we have to look to embrace the new ways of doing agriculture. We have to look at new ways of building sounder structures, that citizens have to take responsibility for looking at how am I going to make sure that my home can survive a catastrophe such as a hurricane or severe flooding. Now, sir, I know that this is a lot for Barbadians to take in. We are going through a period of rapid change. And we are now asking citizens to think differently about how they do a number of things. But as a government, we want to partner with them and walk with them and help them to prepare them. Even simple things like retirement planning is something people have to do more of. Simple things like how are we going to take care of our elderly? That's something we have to rethink and have to reposition. One of the things that we have to be able to do is how are we going to change the way we eat, that we can deal with health. Everything in Barbados is changing. And as a people, I want to make a call that we have to be as proactive as our government. We have to partner. We have to work together in order to help us make the transition, that we can weather any storm that will be thrown at us, because we don't know what will happen. I was chatting, sir, with one of the members of the DEO, very outstanding man, who has contributed to Barbados significantly and given significantly every year on a volunteer basis to help us with disaster emergency management. And I was asking him how were we getting through in relation to the hurricane period, because I know it works the DEO teams very, very hard. And he said, I was hoping that he would tell me that the worst was behind us. But what he said to us was that in truth and in fact, the continued heating of the country, the continued rising of temperatures actually means that we will get more activity in the month of October. My heart sank. I said, we have got to get through another month, maybe another month and a half, and pray that we are not visited either by a hurricane or floods that seriously discommode our population. But when he said that to me, it reinforced for me as an MP that I have a responsibility to help each of my constituents understand the urgency of the hour, understand that they must do the necessary preparations, understand that they too must save and put aside funds that will help them to be able to make their shelter stronger, that they need to put aside funds and put aside time to build food security so that we can weather October and possibly November, and more importantly, next year, that as a country and as a constituency, that we sit down and work together to see what we can put in place so that when we approach another hurricane season, that this country will be stronger and better protected, because the loss of that house can set a family back and throw it into poverty and alter significantly the trajectory of the lives of every person in that household and destroy dreams. That's what we're talking about. That's how serious it is. And therefore, I want to commend the government for the proactive position in making better use of the catastrophe fund. I want to pray that the ones who have to do the implementation, that the work of their hands will go well, that they'll be able to do it effectively, efficiently, and quickly, and that through this, Barbados will be made stronger, and the lives and the dreams of our citizens will be better protected. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Christchurch. Yes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, let me thank all those members who spoke and contributed to the debate. The member for Christchurch East for explaining the amendments from the legal side of things. The member for St. George South for his contribution is how he continues the program and his commitment to getting the program finished. And the member for St. James South for bringing that side of it, that human face, to understanding the problems that are associated with these catastrophes. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try to put a little context to it. For those of you who've had to build a house, one house, imagine the difficulties that you had to build one house. You had to get the contractor. Maybe you had to get the painter. You have to make sure that you have the appropriate funding. You have to make sure that everything is paid, that the workmen get paid timely. You know, if they don't get paid at the end of the week, what's happened? Men is fine cutlasses and things. You have to make sure that you pass all the various regulations. You have to make sure that you're a proper distance away from the boundary, that you're not close to your neighbor. You have to make sure that you're a certain distance away from the front of the road. You have to get the GED to pass it. You have to make sure that the sewage is appropriately connected. You have to get the well appropriately covered and dug, possibly with a septic tank as well. That is one house, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes the house takes 12 months. Sometimes a private person building a house themselves could take 14 months. Sometimes they build a part of the house, live in the part, and take 3 years to do the other part. Imagine doing 500 houses in 500 different locations. Not even 500 houses in one location. 500 houses in 500 different locations with 500 different owners or hundreds of landlords, some that are amenable and some that are not. And then on top of it, simultaneously doing 600 repairs, all in the space of 12 months. A mammoth task by any stretch of the imagination. You know, but sometimes people think that you just wave a magic wand and these things are fixed because it's government. But government has additional processes, tender processes, contractual arrangements, approval of contract. All of those things in addition to what the average person doing their one house has. So I want people to understand that this was new territory for us. But this was important because it prepares us for what may be yet to come. You know, the Prime Minister often says that there's a saying that every cloud has a silver lining, but every silver lining got a cloud too. And I remember that well. The silver lining of this cloud was we were able to get some people in construction back to work. People that in the last decade, when construction came to an end and we couldn't get anything built in Barbados, we got some carpenters, some masons, some electricians working again. We got contractors able to employ people. That was one of the silver linings of this cloud. The downside of it, access to materials became an issue. Blocks became hard to get. Because remember, the vast majority working on repairs, and then people who wanted to build their new house for the first time couldn't get blocks, couldn't get workmen, couldn't get supplies, and they had difficulties, and it made their houses take longer. So we saw all the sides of it. This was a whole government effort. And it continues to be, because it ain't finished till every last person is housed appropriately, and we are going to finish it. So I want to thank not only those who contributed, but all of government. From the Prime Minister for providing the funding, from all the various agencies, from all the various MPs for feeding the information into us, for the DOs that went out and got that information. It was a whole government effort. And for the people of Barbados, for being patient and understanding that we're trying our best with limited resources, but we intend to get all of our brothers and sisters housed. Now, we recognize that some of these houses would have had problems no matter what. We recognize that. Because some houses in Barbados, whether we like it or not, have fallen into dilapidated states. But that is because there are people who can't afford to fix it. You know, if Mr. Speaker, a person has money, they're going to fix where they live, because shelter and housing is a human right, and people respect their accommodations and their houses. But if they don't have the wherewithal because they're below the poverty line, and that's exactly what this fund is about, that the government has to step in and support those who cannot help themselves. And that's what we have to do as a caring government, as a government that requires and demands of our population that we must help each other and hold up each other. And that is exactly what we intend to do with this legislation. So I have full support of this. This is a forward-thinking way of dealing with a problem and preparing us for when that next catastrophe comes. And there is the time we would say if. We can't say if anymore. Not seeing that the 1 in 50-year flood happening every 10 years. Because that's what we used to build. We used to build a 1 in 50. Oh, there's a 1 in 50 flood. There's a 1 in 50 storm. But the 1 in 50 happening 1 in 10, 1 in 5. And to the Honourable Member for St. James South Point, the actual peak, when we look at hurricanes in the region, is actually October. The actual peak, when they took all across the board of all the systems, whether they impact land or don't impact, is actually the peak time is actually October. But there was a time when we used to say November all over, but that don't apply no more. That don't apply no more. You can actually, there have been earlier systems and there have been later systems. So all of those norms are now, we are in a new normal, I would have to say. And we have to adapt to where that new normal has taken us. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to getting these funds, accessing these funds once the legislation is changed, and once we can access those funds, full steam ahead to continue this program and get us to that finish line. With those few words, I'm obliged and ask that this bill be read a second time.
Question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that you do not leave the chair for further consideration of this bill. Mr. Speaker, sorry, I beg to move the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Clause 1,
Chairman, I better move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
Bear to second that.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
The question is that clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker 1 passage of bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report His Honour the Speaker the passage of 1 bill in committee. All members against, please say aye. All members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committee is reporting the passing of 1 bill in committee. Honourable member for Christchurch West.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Act 2022.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the adjournment of the House until the 11th of October at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be adjourned until Tuesday, the 11th day of October, 2022 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 11th day of October 2022 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.